Good day to you. A warm welcome to the ACGN IoD Chairs Forum. My name is Mike Juro. I will be your convener. And at this point in time, I wish to acknowledge the presence of our convener, President Roxon Dobega, all presidents and chairs of IoDZ across Africa, our speaker, Patrick D. Chisanga, participants from 18 countries who have joined us, and special mention to those who are outside Africa, who are from India, Ireland, UK. And from Africa, we do have participants from Ghana, Kenya, Liberia, Namibia, Nigeria, South Africa, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. We all know we are only as strong as we are united, and as weak as we are divided. That's J.K. Rowling. We are here today for a reason, and it is a work in progress as more things are going to be coming from the ACGN, Africa Corporate Governance Network. I will not take much of your time for now. I'll hand you over to our convener, the president of Iod Ghana, Mr. Roxon Dobega.
Thank you very much, Mike. Our guest speaker, the past president of Zambian Institute of Directors, Mr. Patrick Chisanga. Our moderator for today, the president of Zimbabwe Institute of Directors, Dr. Mike Eric Juro. All other past and present chairs of Institute of Directors from the African continent present at today's engagement. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen from Africa and across the globe, a very good afternoon and evening to all of you. I welcome you to the maiden edition of the knowledge sharing session of the Chairs Forum. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the Chairs Forum comprises of chairs of the Institute of Directors in Africa that are also members of the African Corporate Governance Network. The African Corporate Governance Network is a collaborative network of director membership organizations that promote effective corporate governance on the African continent. The objective of the Chairs Forum is to leverage on the strength of all key players on the continent for purposes of networking, knowledge sharing, promoting good corporate governance outcomes, which are critical in ensuring the prosperity of businesses and nations. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, to ensure that African continental free trade agenda meets its intended objectives, there is the need to put in place appropriate corporate governance infrastructure on the continent. Our collaborative aspirations in the Africa we want by 2063 will depend on good governance. If Africa will become one, a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. Two, an integrated continent, politically united and based on the ideals of Pan-Africanism and the vision of Africa's Renaissance. Three, an Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. Four, a peaceful and secure Africa. Five, an Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics. Six, an Africa where development is people-driven, unleashing the potential of its women and youth. Seven, Africa as a strong, united, and influential global player and partner. Then we must prioritize good governance. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the Chairs Forum, in collaboration with ACGN, seeks therefore to establish periodic engagement with all stakeholders to network and share knowledge towards the promotion of the culture of good corporate governance on the continent in support of the successful implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Agenda and the Africa we want by 2063. We are blessed today to have the past president of the Institute of Directors, Zambia, to share some governance experiences with us. I wish us all a fruitful engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, President Roxon.
Thank you.
Moving on with our program for the day. Allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to present to you a man filled with the spirit of service and leadership, an accomplished corporate leader, entrepreneur, public sector leader, presenter, a governance guru, over and above a Rotarian, a golfer, and an author. He has spent nearly 20 years in the public corporation sector of Zambia, where he served as chief executive and chairman of main organizations and companies. He is the chairman and lead consultant of Dynamic Concept Limited, a consultancy firm which undertakes corporate governance consulting and leadership development in Zambia and across Africa as a whole. He previously served as advisor to Konkola Copper Mines, KCM, Zambia's largest copper mining company, from 2009 to 2013. He served as chairman of Air Namibia Zambia Limited from December 2010 to December 2019. He served as advisor to Scorpion Zinc Mines of Namibia, 2010 to 2014. He currently serves on the board of several local and international companies across Zambia as chairman and non-executive director. He currently serves as well as the board member for EcoBank Foundation. In 2014, he was appointed by the President of Zambia to serve as a member of the Legal and Justice Reform Commission of the Republic of Zambia. And again, in 2014, August, he was appointed by the Zambian government to serve as Director General of Zambia Development Agency, ZIDA, which is charged with the responsibility of promoting and facilitating Zambia's economic growth and development. In 2018, he was appointed chairman of the board of directors of the Lusaka South Multi-Facility Economic Zone, a key instrument of Zambia's industrialization and diversification economic strategy. And 2019, our presenter today was appointed again by the government of the Republic of Zambia to serve as secretary of the National Dialogue Forum. As a corporate leader, he is the founding and fellow of the Institute of Directors Zambia, where he served as president for 3 years, in 2002 to 2005. He is the past chairman of the Institute of Chartered Secretary and Administrators in Zambia, and is past vice chairperson of the Economic Association of Zambia. He is a former board member of the directors of Commonwealth Association of Corporate Governance. He has served as a member of the Global Corporate Governance Forum Private Sector Advisory Group to the World Bank. And he is a member of the Advisory Council of the Namibian Institute of Corporate Governance. In 2014, in 1994, our presenter today, he took early retirement to focus on running his own family business. It's a group of companies under Muchanga Investment Limited, which he had founded in 1987, in which he serves as chairman today. He has made many presentations on corporate governance in countries in Southern and West Africa region, which include Mozambique, South Africa, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Nigeria, and his home country of Zambia. In the golfing circles, he served as president of the Lusaka Golf Club, Zambia's premier golf club, for a period of 3 years, and he's a keen golfer. He is currently a trustee of the Lusaka Golf Club. Over and above that, the spiritual service, which we talked about, he is a Rotarian and a past governor in Rotary International District 9210, comprising Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Northern Mozambique. He served as international training leader of Rotary International from 2006 to 2008. He served as chairman of Rotary International in Africa. And in his capacity, he was mandated to coordinate Rotary's developments in humanitarian work on the African continent. And in 2020, he was appointed a member of the board of directors of Rotary International. In this capacity, he will represent 54 countries of Africa on the board of directors of Rotary International for the period 2022 to 2024. After traveling that long journey, in December 2019, he published his first book, The Development and Practice of Corporate Governance in Zambia, Successes and Challenges. And building on his experience today, he will be sharing with us the development, growth, and practice of corporate governance in Zambia. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow directors, my fellow chairs and presidents, I present to you a fellow of the Chartered Governance Institute UK from London School of Accountancy, a Chartered Governance professional, also a fellow of the Institute of Directors Zambia and a member of the Institute of Directors Southern Africa, Mr. Patrick Daniel Chisanga. Over to you, Daniel.
Well, thank you, Moderator Mike, for that great introduction. I am really humbled that you covered so much ground. I didn't realize you did so much research to find out all of that. It's been a long road in corporate governance. Good day, fellow directors, ladies and gentlemen across Africa and beyond. Allow me to start by thanking the president of Iod Ghana, Mr. Robson Dogberger, who is the convener of this forum, the IoD Chairs Forum. I want to thank him for honoring me with the opportunity to be the first and maiden speaker on this distinguished Pan-African Forum, which I know will go a long way in extending the frontiers of corporate governance on the African continent. My presentation, and being the maiden presenter, I'm mindful that I should not make a long presentation, but rather I want to make sure that my presentation will be long enough to cover the subject matter, but short enough as to remain interesting. With that background, let me now take you through my presentation outline this afternoon or this evening, depending on where you are. I have structured my presentation in this manner. I have put it in 8 areas. First, I would like to walk through a brief reflection on the history of corporate governance on the African continent, since Africa is our focus. And then I'll bring it home to Zambia, my home country, and give you a historical perspective of corporate governance in Zambia, where we have come from, where we stand now, and where we need to go. So in this respect, I will break up the presentation into 2 time periods. 1964 to 1991. 1964 was the year Zambia got its independence. So I cover those early years up to 1991 when we embraced multi-party democracy. The second part is from 1991 to the year 2000. And I benchmark the year 2000 because that is the year in which the Institute of Directors of Zambia was incorporated and began to function. After that, I want to look at the birth of IoD Zambia and looking at the challenges we faced along the way, how we resolved them, and so on. Following on that, I want to look at the corporate governance reform program that has taken place in Zambia during this period of time. That is both in the public sector as well as in the private sector. Then I want to discuss and share with you the establishment of an institution called the IDC in Zambia. IDC stands for the Industrial Development Corporation. And I will say a little more on this groundbreaking development later in this presentation. Then I want to talk about the international outreach that we have enjoyed as Zambia, and particularly through the Institute of Directors. Then I want to look at the way forward for Zambia, for Africa, and I will conclude. So, to go to the African continent, corporate governance on the African continent began in South Africa. And my research shows that in 1960, IoD London established a branch in South Africa. And it gathered momentum very quickly. Members were signing up and grew from strength to strength. In 1985, IoD South Africa was incorporated as a standalone institution on its own. And at that time, it has 1,480 members from South Africa, not Southern Africa at that time. In 1992, most of you are familiar with the name Professor Mervyn King, that guru of corporate governance in our part of the world. So in 1992, IoD South Africa mandated Professor Mervyn King to initiate corporate governance reform study. And this resulted in 1994 with the publication of what we have all come to know as King 1, the King 1 report. And in 2002, the King Committee went on to research and to publish King 2 on corporate governance. In 2009, King 3 report was released. And finally, in 2016, King 4 was launched in South Africa. I thought I would chronicle this because those of us who have followed corporate governance on the African continent, these are the documents that we have used as our Bible. The King reports from King 1, King 2, King 3, and King 4. I'm sure most of us have used these documents. So that is the background. What about the rest of Africa? How did we fare? Well, I think the next signpost was Zimbabwe to come on board corporate governance. The Institute of Directors of Zimbabwe, I think, was next in line. And they grew to a very strong IoD. And I remember that when we were starting to put together our baseline work for the formation of IoD Zambia, we called on IoD Zimbabwe to support us and to strengthen us. So they started a little earlier. Thereafter, I noted that Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Zambia, and many others in which we have IoDs on the African continent. Most of these initiated their IoD organizations somewhere around the same time, from 1998 to 2002. And so we have that position at the moment. Let me now move to the Zambian historical perspective. I want to look at the period between 1964 to 1991. I want to look at nationalization, Mulungushi reforms, and so on, very briefly. So at independence in 1964, the Zambian economy was principally controlled by the private sector, who were mainly multinationals from Europe, from the USA, from the East, who set up companies here, from the mining companies, banks, insurance companies, manufacturing companies, and so on. And most of them were controlled from foreign capitals. And because they came from economies that were already developed, the practice of corporate governance in most of these institutions and companies was fairly well-grounded. But Zambia became independent in 1964, and our founding president, whom we put to rest just a couple of months ago, may his soul rest in peace, Dr. Kenneth David Kaunda, he felt that the Zambian economy needed to be nationalized. And so in 1968, the Mulungushi economic reforms were stipulated, followed by the Matero reforms in 1969. Between these two sets of economic reforms, what it meant was that the government of Zambia acquired, on average, 51% shareholding in all the major companies that were operating in Zambia. And of course, they were compensated in different forms. And that was the position. And that development ushered in the state-owned enterprises or parastate organizations from 1969 onwards. That's what gave rise to the hundreds of state-owned enterprises that we've had and we still have to some extent in Zambia. Now, I wanted to discuss the challenges that were experienced in Zambia in the governance of state-owned enterprises. We were able to establish that one of the principal challenges was that in nearly all state-owned enterprises, there was no demarcation between ownership and governance. Ownership was in the hands of government through its principal officers, but obviously the shares were held by the ministries of finance at successive points. And the governance of the institutions were also in the hands of appointed civil servants who constituted the boards of directors and the CEOs and so on. In fact, as you heard from Dr. Juru in his opening remarks, I served in the parastatal sector, the SOE sector, in the 80s, coming up to 1991. And what was interesting in those days was that CEOs of state-owned enterprises were appointed from State House by the president. And the appointments were usually made at a press conference. And we were fired the same way when the time came. So that was the nature of our state-owned enterprises at that time. We also observed that performance monitoring in the state-owned enterprises was poor and ineffective. And resultantly, as a result, there was no satisfactory return on the investments that were made in these corporate entities. And no doubt, the capital base of most of these companies became eroded, including the mining industry, which is very capital intensive. You needed to re-ingest fresh capital from time to time, capital which the government didn't have, and there was no return on the investment, so it became a very, very difficult scenario. Many state-owned enterprises, naturally, from the scenario I've described, were unprofitable and became a drain on the national budget. Baseline instruments of corporate governance like annual reports were not regularly produced and lacked transparency. So the picture we see is that generally, there were no specific explicit objectives or performance targets, for that matter, to measure the performance of state-owned enterprises. Also, a principal instrument of corporate governance in the governance of any organization is the strategic plan. Now, in the state-owned enterprises of those days, it was not uncommon to find organizations without a strategic plan. At best, they operated on the basis of an annual plan and rolled on from year to year. So they didn't have that strategic vision to be able to project and plan for growth and development. The ownership functions in the state-owned enterprises were shared between the Ministry of Finance and line ministries. And that also created a problem of supervision. In short, from what I have said, ladies and gentlemen, the state-owned enterprises lacked sound corporate governance practices, generally speaking. That then moves me to the period 1991 to the year 2000. In 1991, a major social-political event took place. This was the introduction of multi-party democracy. And the political party, our founding president's political party, UNIP, which had ruled from 1964 to 1991, was defeated in the general elections of 1991, November 1991 to be precise. And the new government, which was headed up by a gentleman called, he's late now, Dr. Frederick Chiluba, was a trade unionist, came in on a strong platform of denationalization. And they were urged on by the World Bank that if you're going to enjoy any form of concessions, any form of support, you will need to nationalize, to denationalize the economy. And so in 1991, we saw the process of denationalization. This took the form of privatization of companies, organizations, and other corporate entities that were nationalized back in 1968, 1969. And this was a condition, one of the conditionalities of the IMF World Bank support. But looking back in hindsight, the privatization process perhaps proceeded at too rapid a pace. And we saw that previous organizations, companies, corporate entities that were employing quite a number of people and producing a certain level of economic output began to crumble into the ground. We saw the breakup of ZIMCO. For those of you who may not be aware, ZIMCO stood for Zambia Industrial Mining Corporation, which was a giant state-owned enterprise which embraced the mining industry, financial institutions, including Zambia National Commercial Bank and insurance companies, and so on. As part of the privatization process, government moved to break up ZIMCO into smaller entities and offering them for investment to the private sector. Now, you have to remember that at that time, most Zambians did not have the capital nor the business experience to take over companies and run them profitably and efficiently. And so a lot of the privatized companies began to struggle. And that was the situation up to the year 2000. The privatization process was going on. establishment of state-owned enterprises was going on, and so on. And the economy generally during that period went through a very difficult period. And if you look up the economic history of Zambia, I think that was one of our most difficult experiences in our history. That was the time when we started to experience shortages of commodities, including essential commodities and so on, coupled by the dropping in the price of copper during that period and the high price of oil. It all became a heavy burden on the Zambian economy. And so during that time, it coincided with the birth of the Institute of Directors of Zambia. There was a feeling amongst many of us who were in the business circles at the time that we needed to bring corporate governance, sound corporate governance principles and practices to the Zambian economy. And we needed to have a vehicle to do this. And that vehicle had to be the Institute of Directors. And so we got together colleagues from various corners of the economy to come together back in 1998. We convened a conference at Intercontinental Hotel in June of 1998. And I want to recollect that we received tremendous support from the Institute of Directors of Zimbabwe. I clearly remember the then president of the Institute of Directors of Zimbabwe, and his name was Mr. Boyman Mankama. I've lost track of him. I hope he's still alive and well. He was a very spirited supporter to our efforts and the entire machinery of the Institute of Directors of Zimbabwe, who were already an established institute. We had support from Anglo-American of South Africa. We had support from the Commonwealth Association of Corporate Governance in London. We had support, institutional support, from the Institute of Corporate Governance in New Zealand, and a number of other established institutes. In fact, they came to participate in that conference that we held at Intercontinental in 1998. It was a very cold 2 days, I remember, because that's the coldest part of our seasons. Now, as a result of that conference, a task force was put together with a mandate to begin to work towards the establishment of IoD in Zambia. And I was privileged to be thrown into the deep end of the pool by being asked to chair that institute. So I chaired that task force. We had colleagues, some of them have served on the IoD, some of them on this platform today. I know people like my colleague and brother and friend, Mumbaka Pumpa, I know Sherry Tole and many others who formed part of that initial groundswell. So from that meeting, which was so well supported internationally, we started the steps, a step at a time, towards the formation of IoD Zambia. I have mentioned the institutions that gave us institutional support, but one big problem, one big challenge we had was funding. To set up the institute, you needed funds, and we actually started by dipping into our own pockets to deal with the initial requirements to register IoD as a corporate entity. And some of us had to put up personal guarantees for the new corporate entity. I want to recollect that during that period, we had funding from the European Union there was a gentleman called Chris Silly, who was heading up the European Union office in Lusaka. And I went to visit him and I said, Chris, look, we've got this enormous project to establish an institute of directors in our country. Are you in a position to support this kind of capacity building? And he said, Patrick, just go and put your numbers together and we will see what we can do. We have been following what you've been doing and we are impressed with the strides that you've made so far. So with the support of funding from the EU, we've set up the first annual general meeting in Lusaka, at which we wanted to formalize the various institutions and also table the working documents that were produced by the task force. And I mentioned that we started working back in 1998. So we worked for a period of 2 years to establish the constitutional documents and other instruments of operation. We borrowed a great deal naturally from more established IoDs elsewhere, and we started to operate. We had no office at the time, and so my office, I offered my office as a temporary home for IoD Zambia, and that's even the box number, if you see the early correspondence, was that of my office. Until one of our colleagues became executive director, when we started to make it now more functional, and we transferred the office to Mary Nube's offices, who was another colleague in corporate governance. But we were determined that we should strengthen the base of IoD Zambia. We needed to have a secretariat established. We needed to have offices, not camping in offices of members. And so at that time, we had the UNDP operating in Zambia. It still does. But I mentioned the UNDP because there was a lady called Dr. Akarele King. And I went to see her and said, look, we're looking for space to give independence, operating independence to IoD Zambia. And she said, look, I don't have money to give you. The UN doesn't work in that manner, but I can do one thing. I can spare one office in the UN building, and you can operate from there. In fact, as it turned out, there were two offices. So one doubled as the secretary and the other one as the office of the administrative officer, who happened to be, at that time, we managed to interest Mrs. Victoria Silutongwe, and she came on board. I think it was during the time I was president, to become as our administrative officer at no pay. She was not getting paid at all. You know, that was the sort of sacrifice that were made. And they also allowed us to use the UNDP boardroom that was on the top floor. So all our meetings could be held now in that building, and we had that office as our secretariat. Incidentally, Victoria Silutongwe has been working very closely with the Chairs Forum, and I know she's been in close contact with President Roxon and other officers that have been working so hard to establish this institution. And the interesting story about Victoria, if I should just mention a word, is that she's joined the IoD Zambia as an administrative officer. We encouraged her later on to proceed to become executive director. And beyond that, again, we encouraged her to serve as vice president of the IoD. And because she excelled herself and she knew so much, it was easy to elect her as president a few years ago of the institute. So she became the first lady president of the IoD, and she's done an outstanding job. She's part of the chair forum. So that was the beginning of what I can call the journey towards corporate governance reform, triggered by the Institute of Directors of Zambia. We structured our reform at two levels. With the private sector and with the support of the Global Corporate Governance Forum, of which I was a member. This is a wing of the IFC in World Bank. We developed director training programs, trainers programs. And it also, because now we could charge for our services, we could charge corporations for sending their directors for training and so on, we started to generate some money. And so the private sector director training program was hatched. And I think the records show that we have trained a fairly large number of directors who are now serving in different parts of the economy. We also set about to develop or to try and develop a code of corporate governance. And in this area, we worked closely with the Lusaka Stock Exchange because at least there was a basis for them to structure some listing rules for the corporate, for the stock exchange, which were corporate governance thresholds. And so through the Lusaka Stock Exchange, the first code of corporate governance, it was very rudimentary, I have to admit, but it was a start. And that was used for some time until people graduated to the King Committee report and so on. A lot more work was focused on the state-owned enterprises because 80% of the economy was in the hands of state-owned enterprises. Only 20% was private sector. So we focused our work more on reforming corporate governance in the public sector. So we developed very good relations with government at different levels, including the head of state. And I want to remember with a lot of respect, the very sound relationship that we developed with the late President Levi Mwanawasa. He opened these doors. We had meetings with him and discussed and tabled our proposals for reform. We pointed out how the lack of strong corporate governance principles and practices were contributing to the underperformance of the economy and so on. And he was very receptive to a lot of our proposals. And at one time, actually, he became so keen in our work that in one of his speeches in Parliament, in reference to economic reforms in the country, corporate governance reforms, he acknowledged the fact that at that time, I had just been appointed to the board of corporate governance with the board, the Commonwealth Association of Corporate Governance, which was a very distinguished development. And just to show his support to our work, he made reference to that in a speech in Parliament. We felt very boosted and very encouraged. So as a result of these interactions and the reforms that we were tabling with government, a number of reforms began to unroll. To begin with, civil servants were no longer appointed to chair the boards of SOEs, which was the case before. All SOE boards were chaired by permanent secretaries and in some cases, government ministers. So there was a policy decision taken as a result of our representations and recommendations that civil servants will no longer be appointed to chair the boards of SOEs. To this day, all the boards of state-owned enterprises are now chaired by directors from the private sector, which has ingested a strong sense of corporate governance principles and practices. And also members of SOE boards have now drawn from the private sector. So the private sector is playing its role to strengthen state-owned enterprises. And also, as a result, we now saw the implementation of sound corporate governance practices in just about all the state-owned enterprises. This led to the introduction of modern corporate governance systems in SOEs. It led to enhanced transparency in board appointments, and there were no longer appointments to boards, were no longer on the basis of political patronage. They were on the basis of qualification and competence. We now begin to see board charters being developed in state-owned enterprises. And finally, we also begin to see strategic planning being implemented in all the state-owned enterprises. Such was the level of corporate governance reform that we as IoD can lay some claim to having influenced to move Zambia from where it was to where it is now. The next stage in corporate governance reform was the establishment of the Industrial Development Corporation. This was under the government of President Michael Sata, the Patriotic Front Party, which, by the way, was voted out of office just last week. You know, we are now on our fourth political party to form government. I suppose that's good democracy. So in January 2014, the government of the Patriotic Front felt that there was need to establish a vehicle for industrialization and job creation. Initially, most observers, most of us actually felt that what President Sata was actually doing is merely to bring back the old ZIMCO, which was criticized for being bloated, for being all those inefficiencies that were leveled against it. And also the fact that the president of the country was also the president of ZIMCO. So when IDC was formed, there were these concerns that this is just, it's going to be a repetition of the ZIMCO affair, particularly when we learned that the president of the country in this new setup is also going to be the president of the chair of the board of the IDC. And that's still the position up to now. But the impact of the IDC, I think, has been very positive in my observation. Because first of all, it has resulted in a repositioning of all state-owned enterprises. And they took over a total of 34 remaining SOEs that had not been privatized at the time. 34 state-owned enterprises were taken over by IDC, and we could see, and we continue to see, improvement management capacities in the SOEs. We're also beginning to see financial viability and sustainability in these institutions. And very importantly, in terms of reinvestments, we have been able to see that SOEs are now becoming profitable. Every so often, they declare dividends. A big check is written, and it's in the newspaper that such and such a company, state-owned enterprise, has declared a dividend of so much after making profits of so much for this particular financial year. These were welcome fruits of the corporate governance reform program, you will agree. Also, part of the program of the IDC has been to co-invest with the private sector. What this means is that if a foreign investor is seeking to invest in Zambia and is looking for a partner, they can partner with another member of the private sector, a Zambian private sector, or they can partner with the IDC, which is the government representation. But the IDC, I need to make clear, is not established as a government department. It's actually established under the Companies Act and follows all the corporate governance tenets and requirements. So, and incidentally, I think it's important to point out that the Ministry of Finance is no longer a shareholder in the companies, state-owned enterprises that are surviving. The shareholder, the holding company, is the IDC. And since the time they came into play, which is now about 7 years ago, they have formed even new partnerships in the private sector. They've injected fresh capital in new companies that they have formed. And we have seen that most of these companies are declaring and returning profits and dividends. And so there is now a return on investment is being scored, again, as a result of sound corporate governance. We now see also that one of the requirements under state-owned enterprises is that each year there has to be a performance contract between the company, the board of directors, and the shareholders. And performance benchmarks are articulated in quantifiable terms so that you can measure achievement at the end of the year. These have become very, very much a part and parcel of the corporate governance landscape. I remember when I was appointed chair of the Lusaka South Multi-Facility Economic Zone, the first thing that I was informed is that there's going to have to be a performance contract between my board and the IDC, who were the shareholders. And I welcomed this. I said, well, this is what we have been preaching about. This is what we have been seeking to see happen. Apart from the important dimension of the performance contracts, we have a new Companies Act in our country, Chapter 10 of 2017. And what has happened in the new act is that a lot of corporate governance requirements, practices, have now been enshrined in the Companies Act. And so compliance to corporate governance principles and practices is no longer just voluntary, or, you know, if you will. Now it is mandatory, and you can be sanctioned for failing to abide by corporate governance principles and practices under the new Companies Act, number 10 of 2017. So the long and short of what I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen, is that corporate governance compliance has become mandatory in the Zambian economy. I want to be faithful to my statements that I will try and cover the subject matter, but I won't speak for too long because then we begin to run into time problems. I wanted to reflect against this background some of the international organizations that we have interacted with over the period at various points in time. I have mentioned the Commonwealth Association of Corporate Governance, the CACG, in which at one point I was invited to serve on the board. They have been with us from the beginning, from 1998, when we had that conference at Intercontinental Hotel, and we established the task force. They have been a very strong stabilizing instrument and strengthening instrument in our journey on corporate governance. The Global Corporate Governance Forum of the IFC of the World Bank, again, I'm allied to that, has been another strong supporter, particularly in the area of director training. All the material that we have been using have been those developed by the GCGF of the IFC. And in many cases, we've also had support, personnel support in terms of specialists to come and help manage the training programs that we have carried from time to time. The Center for International Private Enterprises, CFIPE, is another instrument based in the US that has been very, very supportive. On our own African continent, the African Corporate Governance Network has been part and parcel of our journey. When ACGN was formed in Mauritius, I think it was back in 2013, IoD Zambia attended that conference. I personally did, and many other colleagues, and we were part and parcel of the formation of ACGN. And we continue to be active, as we are doing now, in the affairs of the ACGN. So these are some of the international institutions that have formed the backbone and strengthening capacity of our work as IoD Zambia. Clearly, from what I have said, it's easy to see and to accept that much has been done to raise the bar of corporate governance in Zambia over the last 20 years. But as someone who understands the breadth and width of corporate governance, I hasten to add, ladies and gentlemen, that much more remains to be done in our economy, in our markets. For instance, cabinet ministers in Zambia still have a free hand to dissolve SOE boards falling under their ministries, subjectively and at will. For me, I have always stated that this is not acceptable. But until the policy instruments are changed, that remains the situation. The new president of Zambia, who was speaking just yesterday after being elected, alluded to, because he comes from a business background, he alluded to his desire to strengthen the business entities, the business ethics in our economy in such a way that we can strengthen the economy, because I personally believe that strong companies, strong corporate entities lead to strong economies without question. At the Pan-African level, in terms of the way forward, I believe that ACGN needs to accelerate the pace towards the development of a common guide of corporate governance principles and practices across Africa. I'm very delighted to note and observe that actually steps are being taken towards this. And this forum, the Chairs and Presidents Forum, has started to work in support of this intention from the ACGN. I think it's extremely important so that we can extend the frontiers of corporate governance in all our corporate entities across Africa. To conclude, because I know that my time was up to 18 hours Zambian time, and I have 1 minute to go. As I conclude my presentation, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take the opportunity to announce that a lot of what I have reflected upon in this conversation with you is covered in a book that I wrote and published about 18 months ago. This is a book entitled The Development and Practice of Corporate Governance in Zambia, Successes and Challenges. I'd like to think that our journey, our challenges, our experiences, our successes, even our failures would be instructive to other economies that are slightly at a lower state of development of corporate governance. And I would go so far as to say that this book would help a great deal without sounding commercial. But at any rate, this book is available on Amazon and on most major bookstores in Zambia. Fellow directors, ladies and gentlemen across Africa and beyond, let me thank you very sincerely for your attention and for giving me the opportunity to share these thoughts with you. Thank you very much, Dave.
Oh, thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you very much, President, Governor. You have been there, you have walked the road. And thank you for sharing with us the long journey traveled by Zambia, a journey to corporate governance, a journey with no destination, but a journey that will lead to a better Africa, a journey that we all want to take on. You shared with us the developments of your country, the development of the courts, the reforms that you have done, that you have pushed as IoD. And the most important one that I would want to remind everyone what has happened in Zambia is about board appointments being done based on competence rather than political patronage. And from that, a lot has been gained. It will not only be me who has gained, but I'm sure all the participants. And in the process, the same participants may need some clarifications from you. If there is anyone who has a burning question to ask, may they raise their hand. But I would read the one that we have received so far, which reads, great presentation, say, I agree with him. I followed your presentation with a lot of interest, and I must say, I've learned a great lot of history that I've never known. However, I have one area which I would like your comment on, regarding monitoring corporate governance, especially in line with Common Act of 2017. What provisions are in place to ensure monitoring of corporate governance in Zambian companies? This is a question from Amos Mwelwa. The next one is from Isaac Ajimboni. He says, how do we get the government of Ghana to nominate board members from the Iod Ghana? This is specific to Ghana. Any experience how Zambia IoD went about it? Thank you very much. This is a question from Ghana, but which is asking the road traveled by Zambia. I think let's deal with those two questions that we have so far.
Okay. I think the first question was relating to the provisions of the Companies Act number 10 of 2017. And the question was, what provisions are in place to ensure monitoring of corporate governance in Zambian companies? Well, as you know, all companies registered in this country are regulated by a government department called PACRA. I think everybody knows what PACRA stands for. I can't remember but this is under the Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Industry. Now, the Ministry of Trade and Industry through PACRA require that certain returns and submissions are made at the end of each year from every company registered in Zambia, and there's a requirement that every company must register under PACRA. And so in those returns that you must make to PACRA, reference is made to the various elements requiring compliance. And so you would have to submit your return and answer as to what you have done in this particular financial year to comply with the stated provisions. And obviously, if you have defaulted, the Companies Act is very clear on what sanctions you would be subjected to. So the monitoring instrument, the monitoring authority is PACRA. And in recent times, they have been very, very effective in ensuring that the Companies Act requirements are complied with, the returns are done in good time, and those who delay suffer a punitive sanction. It's very much like, what happens with provisions relating to submission of financial statements, for instance, and the holding of the annual general meeting, which must be held 90 days after the end of the financial year. And you'd have to submit a return that you complied with that. And if you didn't, the sanctions are spelled out in the Companies Act. So the implementing authority in this regard is PACRA under the companies, under the Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Industry. The second question related to Ghana. And I think that it stated, how do we get the government of Ghana to nominate board members from the Iod Ghana? Any experience how Zambia Iod went about it? Thank you. Well, as I tried to share in my presentation, it started with establishing dialogue with government at different levels, at the levels of the Minister of Commerce, at the levels of the Minister of Finance, because these are the economic ministries. And finally, as I also pointed out, State House itself, the president. We held the regular dialogues and put papers across. We invited them to our meetings, and we were not shy to point out that certain practices, like having civil servants chairing boards, we said this is not consistent with best practice across the world anymore. And as I say, the government of Zambia has been receptive, and we've seen positive change taking place. So I think that a similar approach, you would have to engage with the government institutions, the responsible government institutions. And my experience with the government institutions is that don't go to the press and tell the government what you want to say, because they'll get into defensive mode. I think that before you go to the press to say what you want to say, engage the necessary institution or ministry concerned in the quiet of the offices, and put across your positions as clearly as possible. And then you can say, we hope that you will be able to respond to this. If you don't, we are going to take it in public debate. So I believe that Iod Ghana, and we have a very, very effective president at the moment. I've enjoyed interacting with him these last few days, Roxanne Dogberger. I think that he might wish to comment on this to supplement what I have suggested.
Yeah, thank you very much, Past President Patrick. Indeed, efforts have been made in Ghana to get members of IoD appointed to serve on boards. About 2 months ago, I had a letter from His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Ghana, for us to submit names. And so we are currently validating our database, and we'll be responding to that request as a follow-up to several interventions we have made to His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Ghana, to make available the resource we have to enhance the corporate governance environment in Ghana. The biggest challenge we have in Ghana is through some legislations. Most of these state-owned enterprises have a legislative instrument that, defines membership of the boards, which currently does not include IoD. And that is the legal limitation. And so for our members to be able to serve on that, or otherwise on those boards, there's the need for an amendment to some of those provisions. And so we're doing a lot of stakeholder engagement and consultation. We are hoping that, some windows will be opened, and very soon our members will begin to be invited to serve on, public sector boards. Thank you. Let me also add that your presentation has been very, very illuminating, very insightful, and a lot of lessons to learn from your rich experience. Having to go the extra mile to sacrifice deep money, deep your hand in your own pocket to finance, that is a demonstration of a selfless service, wanting to promote the culture of good corporate governance. And that is very, very commendable. I want to congratulate you for your rich service and dedication to promoting good corporate governance, not only in Zambia, but across Africa. And you are actually an inspiration to some of us. Thank you very much, Past President Patrick Chisanga.
Thank you, President Roxon. I appreciate those kind words.
Thank you. Moving on with the questions that we received from the participants, we have one question from Francis Maofa, which says, thank you for the great presentation, Mr. Chisanga. And I note the commendable progress corporate governance in Zambia is the appointment of boards of directors on SOEs from the private sector, but may attempt to align with the economic performance of Zambia, i.e., if corporate governance and the country's economic performance are in any way linked. I'll go to ask another question.
Yes.
From Isaac. Does IoD Zambia has a legislative backing from the parliament or government? The third one, how is IoD's Zambia dealing with gender issues, gender balance associated with corporate governance in both private and public sector? Yeah, if you could address the three questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the first one was from Mr. Francis Mahofa. How do you attempt to align the economic performance of Zambia if corporate governance countries' economic performance are in any way linked? In my experience, Brother Francis, there's a very strong correlation between the level of corporate governance practice attained in a particular economy and the level of economic development. You take a good look around the economies in the SADC region or even beyond across Africa. Look at Mauritius. Mauritius is one of those countries where corporate governance was embraced very early on. And instruments of corporate governance in Mauritius are evident in every sector of the economy. And as a result, Mauritius is the #1 performing economy on the African continent. Corporate governance. Look at Zambia. You know, prior to 2000, when we began the process of corporate governance reform, our economy's performance was very poorly. And mind you, I'll accept it, there's a multiplicity of factors. But I want to still advance that poor corporate governance was a contributory factor in our country's poor economic performance in those times. Now, you have seen in the last 15 years, the levels of foreign direct investment, for instance, that has flown into the country. When I served as Director General of the ZDA, I got to the ZDA in 2014. And at that time, the level of foreign direct investment into our economy was somewhere around $400,000 per annum. By the time I was leaving 4 years later, we had recorded 4.5 billion United States dollars. These figures are there for you to check. 4.5 billion United States dollars into the Zambian economy. And hence, a lot of the infrastructure development, new companies and so on that have sprung up. And I very much contend that a large percentage of that, which has attracted the flow of foreign direct investment into our economy, has been the positive perception and reality by foreign investors that Zambia has got a sound system of corporate governance. There's accountability, there's the rule of law. All these things are corporate governance instruments. And this is what has led to what we have seen in the Zambian economy. South Africa, the same, the home of King 1, King 2, King 3, King 4. Mozambique, and I personally was delegated the responsibility to go and initiate corporate governance establishment in Mozambique some years ago from the IFC. A lot of major improvements to that economy have taken place. And the IOD of Mozambique, I think, have been very resilient, very, very resilient and robust in implementing and encouraging corporate entities to embrace corporate governance. And you have seen what's been happening to the Mozambican economy. Rwanda, which is the #2 country on the African continent in terms of economic development and performance. Similarly, President Kagame, I think he has been very embracing to corporate governance, and we have seen the impact that has had on that particular economy. So there is no doubt that there's a strong correlation between the levels of corporate governance implementation achieved in a particular country and the levels of economic development. I have no doubt about that. The other question was, if I can check on my notes, which one was that? How is IoD dealing with the gender issues, gender balance associated with corporate governance in both the private and public sectors? Well, first of all, we have led by example as IoD. In my presentation, I made reference, I hope I didn't embarrass her, Mrs. Victoria Silutongwe, who started as administrative officer and rose up to be president, and one of the most effective presidents in the IOD. She's still active to this day as a past president. And we have since that time had 2, 3 other lady presidents of the IOD, Mrs. Sherry Tolle, Professor Nkandu Munalula, who actually is now serving as ambassador in Europe. So we have been led by these ladies very effectively. We've moved from strength to strength under their administration. And so we are saying, if we have engaged the leadership of the ladies and they've done so well, surely in other areas as well. And it has started to happen. Look, if you look at the banking sector, you know that a number of managing directors in our banks are ladies. I think the example that we have set has been followed nicely. We have at ABSA, Mrs. Melu. We have at Access Bank, is it Access now, Mrs. Chivesa Kunda, and others. And Mrs. Sherry Tolle herself was MD of a bank when she was in the private sector. So I think if you also examine the board compositions on a number of key boards, you will find that as a result of the example and the momentum that IOD has triggered, you see a number of ladies are serving on boards very, very effectively. Some of them chairs of boards even. So I think we're moving well in that direction. What was the last one? I think that was the last one. Mr. Moderator, did I leave out one?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I take note that President Roxon also needs to chip in. You can go ahead.
I guess you have addressed the concerns. I don't think there is any
gaps.
one if missed. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Dave.
No, thank you very much. While we move on with the answer session, I would like to acknowledge the presence, amid this, the president of Zambia, Edward Kabwe, the past presidents of Victoria Sitongwe, Sherry Tole, and from Zambia, then also Daniel Tembe from Mozambique, Susan Mtangadura from Zimbabwe, Dr. Ebenezer Soinaya from Nigeria, and past vice for Zimbabwe, Senzen Diara. Thank you very much for being with us and maintaining your presence and being active in IoD matters. Moving on our question and answer session, we have one from Sumaila Zizani. Can you share with us how you were able to get legal backing for corporate governance as enshrined in the Companies Act, the hurdles and successes? This question is coming from Zambia, from Ghana rather. And another question, thank you for the great presentation, say, how do we get past the situation whereby the board members are solely elected or chosen by the ruling party or the government in power?
Yeah. Well, in terms of the legal involvement, as I mentioned in relation to another observation, I think the main line of approach is regular engagement with government and government officials at all levels. You will recall that at one time in our country, corporate governance was simply something persuasive, something that you complied with or you didn't at will because there was no sanction. And for many years, we contended that the only way we're going to strengthen compliance is to have the tenets of corporate governance enshrined in our statutory instruments. And we continue to hammer the point by engaging various ministers, various permanent secretaries, until you saw what happened. There was the review of the Companies Act, and there was a general debate. A number of private sector institutions participated in that debate. Recommendations were collected, and the Ministry of Commerce finally came up with a white paper on this subject, which was finally taken to Parliament. And we were able to see that a number of important policy positions, corporate governance positions, have now become part of the law. So the only way is really to engage government in government institutions. You can't do it any other way. You have to keep on working with government, ministries, permanent secretaries, even members of parliament. We used to lobby members of parliament because we knew that eventually these statutory, the bills at that stage, they will land in parliament and they will be debated. So if members of parliament have a good understanding of corporate governance, they will support a meaningful change. And that happened. And that's why we have seen Act number 10 of 2017 has got so much corporate governance in it and pronouncements on what happens for non-compliance. I think there's one about board members solely elected by the ruling party or government in power. I think as far as Zambia is concerned, I want to be fair to government. Corporate governance reform on this one has really moved. As I said, I remained only with one point which I referred to, where ministers can dissolve a board which may be even just 6 months old, state-owned. As soon as the ministers change, there's a new minister who wants to see other people appointed there, and they dissolve the board. I remember training one board, very thoroughly over a period, and including the new chair of the board, who was very enthusiastic about implementing corporate governance reform. And then I met this gentleman somewhere at a function. And I said, well, how is your implementation of corporate governance going after all that training that we did? He said to me, Mr. Chisanga, you haven't heard. I said, haven't heard what? He says, my board was resolved. We were liquidated, all of us, all, without any exception. So there are new people there now. So you find that those unfortunate developments, they do happen still from time to time. But I think by and large, there's been an acceptance by government that there should be a process, a transparent process by which members should be appointed to boards. And institutions like the IoD, like the Institute of Marketing and others should be consulted, when making these appointments. And as I say, we have begun to see this happening. But as I said again in my presentation, much more remains to be done. Moderator?
Thank you. Another question from Elisha Nguya. Thank you very much for the presentation in the detailed journey. We have seen the proliferation of organizations that are issuing awards for corporate governance. What is the IoDZ done in ensuring standardization of such awards?
What we have done is to reach out to many of these, usually they are professional organizations like the Institute of Marketing, the Zambia Institute of Certified Accountants and others, the engineers and so on. The only thing we can do, and what we have done, is to play an advisory role. We don't have any authority to compel them, but we try to play an advisory role and say, look, there are certain tenets you need to take on board. As you formulate the criteria for awards, surely these must be indexed to proven practices, so that even when you announce that company so-and-so or individual so-and-so has been awarded this particular prize, there will be little dispute and say, how was that arrived at? Because it will be seen that, yes, this is a deserving case. So all we can do as IoD is to play an advisory role. And we do this very often. And in some cases, we have partnered with other institutions in making these awards, so that we bring our influence to bear, particularly in the development of the criteria for the awards, so that we ensure some degree of standardization and competence. So our role has to be strongly advisory.
Thank you, President Roxon.
Right. Mike, would you want me to make a comment on that?
Yes.
I cannot agree more with Mr. Patrick Chisanga's response. As IoDs, as much as possible, we can only try to advise. Otherwise, play in an advisory capacity to influence the setting of criteria and being part of the process in the selection process. I'm happy to report that Iod Ghana has been able to establish an award scheme, and it's in its fourth year now. We launched this year's one in June, and hopefully by November, we will be having the IoD Awards in Ghana. And it's also important to mention that at the ACGN front, we have developed a scheme which is aimed at addressing this issued by recognition across the continent. So stakeholders should look out soon, and we will be launching an ACGN Excellence Awards, which will cut across all the countries in Africa. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, President. And we still have a couple of more questions. There is one that is live. I don't know, NM, if you could ask your question.
Thank you so much. My name is Nailoke Manda. I am based in Namibia. Foremost, I'd like to extend a word of appreciation to the presenter, Mr. Chisanga, and also to congratulate IoD Zambia on the great work you are doing up there. I would like to establish how you deal with potential conflicts of interest. Having learned that you had resolved to rather have the private sector chair your boards of SOEs, how do you deal with potential conflicts, knowing that it's specifically for commercial SOEs? Thank you.
Thank you, Nailoke. How is Namibia?
Namibia is great.
Excellent. My second home. The question of conflict of interest, I think one of the best way to deal with it, starting at board level, when appointments are made, and I would hope that these are made through the nominating committee, the corporate governance way. When appointments are made for members of the board of directors, each person on the board must be required to make a declaration in writing of institutions, organizations, and so on, where they have a significant interest. And including those of their close relatives, like their wives or their children, adult children. Because once you do this and renew that list of a declaration every year, you will find that you will minimize the margin for conflict of interest. Because what would happen is when you have certain matters coming on the board agenda, it could be awards of contracts or engagement of personnel or whatever. The moment a person, a board member who has an interest in that matter appearing on the agenda for this particular meeting, corporate governance requires that that individual should recuse themselves. They should declare their interest to the chair. And if it's already been recorded at the beginning of the year, that makes it even easier that they have an interest in this matter. And the board, the chair, will exercise his or her judgment whether the interest is material enough to request that individual to withdraw from that session of the board meeting, or just to announce, to let everyone know that this is the position and still allow that individual to carry on in the meeting. That level of transparency usually preempts potential conflicts of interest. There has to be transparency. Members of the board must declare their interest and renew their declarations in such a way that all their colleagues know that Mrs. Manda is a shareholder in Trans Namibia or any other organization. And if you're dealing with Trans Namib, obviously you don't take a leading role in taking decisions or voting on a particular matter. So I put it to transparency and in advance declaring interest. So company secretaries would advise their chairs that every board member must declare their interests in advance. And if there's a change in their listing of their interests, that fact should be documented on a particular form, which is signed by every board member. I don't know if that's helpful, Nailoke.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
You're most welcome.
Yeah, Mr. Moderator, let me just also add that in Ghana, as part of our new requirement under the company's code, it is required that every board keeps an interest register and records all issues that come up and periodically submit these to the Registrar General of companies for inspection. So that is just to add to what you said. So it's a requirement in Ghana that every board should have an interest register where all this interest will be recorded and periodically inspected and made available to the authorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roxanne.
Thank you for that intervention. And from Zimbabwe, I see that we have a contribution from Evans Kurangwa, who I should also acknowledge is a former vice and executive director for Zimbabwe. To what extent does Zambia embrace corporate governance as a moral suasion than using legislation? To what extent does Zambia Companies Act incorporate provisions of best practice of corporate governance, e.g., your King Codes 1, 2, 3, 4 is their premise on moral suasion? Then he gives an example that in Zimbabwe, Zim Code 1 was launched in April 2016 on a moral suasion. Zimbabwe is now working on Zim Code 2. I would ask that question together with an interesting one from the youth. That's color Galaxy Tab S2. We go to, do you think the relatively young Zimbabwe, young people can participate on governance and or boards? How can we encourage this? Yeah, questions.
The first one from Director Evans relating to moral suasion vis-a-vis or as opposed to legal instrumentation. I think that prior to the enactment of the Companies Act number 10 of 2017, all we had in our hands to try and enforce and encourage the practice of good corporate governance was exactly that, moral suasion. That's what we were using, you know, to demonstrate, to try and persuade companies, directors, and so on that, look, doing things in this loose manner, without transparency, without, you know, solid grounding, is not going to be a good way of running your companies. That's all we were doing, even in King 1 up to 4. All those are based on moral suasion because they are not actually legal instruments. And what they did in South Africa is exactly what we've done here. A number of the provisions in King 1 to 4 have been translated in the Finance Act in South Africa, which acts as a vehicle for corporate governance. And the Annual Finance Act takes on more and more elements. So actually, we all start from simply moral suasion because that's all we have. And then we graduate to the next level, which is now to have legal instrumentation embracing some of these elements. So, you know, it's actually an upgradement of the approach from moral suasion to legal instruments. Because I remember many years ago, the cry amongst many of our members is that how can we get legislation to compel companies to comply with corporate governance? because there was a lot of non-compliance and so on until the legal instruments came into play. So that is the order of things. You start with moral suasion, you move on to legal instrumentation, which is the same, I believe, in Zimbabwe, in Zim Code 1, I think was a development on the moral suasion and moving on to a more codified approach. Because I think that enlists better compliance.
How do you think the relatively young people can participate in issues of corporate governance or boards? How are you encouraging this?
In Ghana, what we're doing is to have an associates wing of membership where we're encouraging students and creating student groups to promote the youth interest. And that is something we're doing very critically. Just about 2 weeks ago, I spoke to one of the institutions who we have signed an MOU with to submit a list of students that we can integrate into some practical training moments with boards and organizations. So there is some work going on there. I believe as governance institution, we need to be deliberate about it, creating the necessary opportunities for our youth to be mentored. I'm also happy to report that in Ghana, we have established a mentorship scheme targeted at the youth development and stimulating their interest in board business. Thank you.
Thank you. The opportunity just to add our own, citing our own situation where as IoD, we have a Youth on Boards initiative which aims at developing the young for them to appreciate governance issues, for them to appreciate board etiquette, which will help them as they progress in their careers. That if they have to become directors, they will be in a position to be adding value. And so that we avoid situation whereby appointments will because somebody is a youth, but they will be competent. The Zambian route, competence over patronage. Right. Moving on. I want to acknowledge Vice Chair of ACGN, Mr. Bandele Abayoni Alimi. Thank you for making time and being with us. Right. The next question that I have is from Josephine. She says, I'm of the view that even though African governments embrace corporate governance, they still would want to somehow exert some control over boards. How would you suggest this power play minimized?
You are suggesting, Josephine, that African governments should exert some form of control over boards. You're referring to the boards of state-owned enterprises. Well, this is already in place. You know, when government puts together a board of directors of a particular state-owned enterprise, the board, rather the government as the owner, because that's the ownership element, ownership versus the governance. The government as owner would normally set out broad objectives of this organization, policy expectations or deliverables are spelled out. And through the system of reporting back to the shareholders through the annual report at the end of each trading period, the boards are exercising control. What is not acceptable or what is inadvisable is for government to be meddling and interfering midstream of the. You see, what is important is that you appoint a board of directors, give them the policy direction, the strategic objectives that you want them to achieve, then leave them alone for at least a period of 12 months to perform and exercise accountability at the end of the financial period when they produce the annual report. Because frequent interference in the workings, in the day-to-day management of the affairs of state-owned enterprises only frustrate boards and management. And corporate governance actually strongly recommends that the shareholders should not be playing a role in the day-to-day management of the affairs of the companies, whether they are private or they are state-owned, in which they own shares. That's not the role of the shareholders. Corporate governance does not recognize that. The role of the shareholders is different and it's spelled out. So really, to advocate for control over boards would be a reversal and a negation of sound corporate governance principles and practices. Josephine, are you still there?
Just finished your written the question.
Oh, so that's a written question. Maybe she has left. Yeah, but that's my response. That's how I look at it in a very, very honest manner. We cannot encourage shareholders to be managing and interfering in the management of companies in which they hold shares. They should leave it to the boards and their managements and hold them accountable at designated periods of time.
Thank you. In the interest of time, we are about 2 hours into the meeting. I will just pick on one or two more questions. This is from Emmanuel Tsega, who acknowledges the presentation. Then your presentation, in your experience and presentation, reveals a lot of work with the executive arm of the Zambian government. Could this be extended to the level of African Union by ACGN? Could ACGN apply for observer status? If not, the last part, could it be about elections? I'm not sure. Emmanuel Tsega, you had your hand up at some point. Just to clarify your question. But before we give to President Patrick, could this be extended to the level of African Union by ACGN? We are currently knocking our doors on the AU doors as we work on other initiatives that we are having to progress the agenda. I'm sure my colleagues would answer, will confirm and hence on that proposition. But if you are still available, Emmanuel Tsega, can you clarify your observer status question? Emmanuel Tsega.
I am on. Normally, we get organizations who want to influence the AU, whether at the executive level or at the ministerial level or at the various organs of the AU. They apply for observer status, and they are given observer status by the AU. And so as observers, they are allowed to attend meetings, observe, and then they can make contributions. It's that basis, so that ACGN then will not have isolated excellence of corporate governance in Mauritius, in South Africa, in Rwanda, or in Ghana, but then their influence will cut across the whole of Africa in some of the policies and decisions and legislation that can be enacted at the level of the AU. That's the basis of the question.
Well, if I may weigh in,
You could answer.
And not being a member of the ACGN board, I would not hazard to try and extract an answer to that. But probably President Roxon will comment on that. But for me, what is more important is for ACGN to lead the momentum towards the development of a common corporate governance guide for Africa, you know, and then each African country, member country, the IoD there would run with it with their own government. Because, look, I spelled out the role of the King reports in South Africa. Most of those had their origin in the South African experience. But what we need now is an overarching guide to embrace the changes, the aspirations that are obtaining in all African countries. And we can agree on some common baseline guidelines. And ACGN is the best vehicle to do this. That's what I would say.
Mike, let me also add that at the Chairs Forum, we have currently started some serious work there, as you're aware, and we are making a serious input into the African Guideline Code that is being developed by the AU. Tomorrow at 15:00 GMT, the chairs will be meeting to consider a working group's reports regarding the review they have done. So we're working very closely, at the moment, AU, and I can assure you that with all stakeholders on board, we will get there. But to the specific question, fortunately, we have the vice chair of ACGN at this forum. I am not an executive member of ACGN yet. I'm not part of the board. And so I would, with the permission from the moderator, I would want to invite the vice chair, the DG of Nigerian Institute of Directors, Mr. Dele, respond to the issue.
Mr. Dele, can you have the floor?
Thank you very much, and a very good evening to everybody. It's evening here in Lagos, so just accept my greetings and adapt it to the situation in your country. I say very big thank you to Mr. Chisanga. That was a very wonderful paper, and it just revealed again to me that the story of Africa is basically the same. We are going through the same journey, and I'm happy to note the development in Zambia, and from the reports or the comments given by our colleagues from other countries, it's like we all agree that the key to economic development in Africa, it's the imbibing of good corporate governance. It has all advantages and no disadvantage from all indication. So I thank you very much. Now to the question, you see, the speaker said, it is important that the ACGN, of course, will first put its house in order. And when I say put its house in order, means we need to have a very strong, viable, and resilient ACGN, stronger than what it is now, and with everybody, every country on board. And also like Mr. Dewega said, yes, we realize that that dream of getting a common corporate governance code for Africa cannot be achieved without carrying along the AU. So whether engagement at the executive level or engagement at the presidential level, there is definitely a need to have a handshake at some point between the ACGN and the AU, because you definitely need the public sector's buy-in in all over the continent. The public sector buy-in is critical. And so like you explained when you were talking about your code of governance in Zambia, or was it in Zimbabwe now? Somebody was talking about persuasion. That is the in thing now in Africa. In Nigeria, our principle is apply and explain. So it's still in that stage because you need to convince not just the big nationals, big multinationals, I beg your pardon, who are already used to the tenet of good corporate governance from their own countries and their, but also to the indigenous, large, small, and medium-sized organizations about the need for them to embrace the principles of good corporate governance. And you cannot do this by wielding a stick. We need to get that right. You cannot do this by wielding a stick. So there must be education, there must be enlightenment, there must be even what I'll call pair comparison about letting them see the progress made by organizations who are actually running the organization in the good tenet of corporate governance, and they can see the improvement and the progress made by such organizations. Then that can be an example. So, and that for me, it's the way we will go in ACGN too. I think country by country examples will also be key. If you could see the progress made by countries that accept and work out good principles, especially countries with good corporate governance codes, and it is working for them, it becomes the examples he wants to put before our leaders in Africa, who are definitely in the AU, to see reasons with ACGN. But like I said, first, ACGN is still crawling, mind my use of the word. But we need to stand on our feet, walk, and then run. So my take is, in the board, we are concerned that we are not yet hitting the nail on the head. We are not yet where we want to be. And I think that should be our first target. I thank God that our guest speaker here it's part of the history of ACGN. And I'm not sure he's quite pleased with where we are now. So we need to put our house in order and really get the appropriate, not just the vision and the mission, but the motion. We need to move. And when we are taken as a serious body, we will be taken seriously everywhere we go. So I don't think we should jump the gun. For me, we should not jump the gun. But every attempt, just like Mr. Lugege said, to prepare ourselves for that role is important. Very, very important. But I'm sure very, very soon we'll start the engagement. And we're going to start the engagement with trying to convince our African leaders of the need to, but nobody is going to take over. You cannot ask the public sector to take over the private sector, well, neither can you ask the private sector to take over the public sector. Everybody has his role to play. Just like the guest speaker said, most of the SOEs are set up with acts that sometimes does not even give any cognizance to corporate governance rules at all. So, and those are the areas where we have to start in the individual countries. It is the same story in Nigeria, it's the same story in Ghana, it's the same story in Zambia, it's the same story in Zimbabwe. So we have a common cause, and that is what ACGN should focus on, and then from there we move. I thank you very much for the opportunity to have my say here. And I also want to say that IoD Nigeria started in 1983. 1983. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Interesting, 1983. And we have Zambia starting off in 2000. Progression on the African continent is more and more countries created institute of directors to push through the agenda of governance. Now, in view of time, and I wish to take this opportunity to acknowledge that, yes, we have a few questions. We'll try, our secretary, they would write them down and just give responses directly to the individuals who they passed. And the last question that I would entertain is from Lucy Chisanga in Zambia.
Sorry, Mr. President. I think my question was answered alongside my sister from Namibia, and the further explanations that have gone on have been thorough. So thank you so much. I've enjoyed participating in this program.
Good to see you, Lucy.
Good to see you too, sir.
Thank you very much. We have Amos Mwelwa. Not clear which country. Can you unmute?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to ask my question. I've already posted my question and I'll quickly just go over it. I would like to find out what the strategic outlook for Zambia's IOD regarding influencing or ensuring that all directors in Zambia and companies are paid up members of the IOD or any similar body. The background to this is that we can only achieve effective corporate governance if our directors in corporates are well trained and understand what is required of them. I thank you.
Thank you, Amos. I did hear that our current president, Mr. Edward Kabwe, is on this platform, and he has the latest position on the issue of paid up members and how many are defaulting and so on. So if Edward is in the room, I would like to invite him to comment on this question that Amos has raised. The moderator did announce that he was on the platform.
Thank you so much, Past President Chisanga. So thank you for that question. Yeah, obviously, that's a very critical issue of ensuring that we have paid up members for the Institute of Directors. But I think the biggest question which is there is getting the requisite profile of the directors joining the IOD. And once they join, then is to push for ensuring paid up membership. So that has been a difficult job, but has been, as has been alluded to by the past presidents, most of whom are here. I think a great amount of job has been done, and we have quite a good number of people in membership of the IOD who span the various levels of seniority in the enterprise, from academia, SMEs, private sector, and public sector. Now, I think the big issue is to indicate that to what extent do we widen that membership beyond the very minimum of those that are coming in through suasion, as has been indicated. So the bigger efforts that we have had of late is to have interaction with the Secretary to the Cabinet to try and get interface with those that are in civil service from the IDC, and continue to having a conversation with the government so that we widen our membership from that angle. You see, the big problem that has also come in is that once we have members on board and members pay membership fees this year, and the following year we ask them to pay membership fee, one of the challenges a member would ask is to say, look, last year I was a member. What is it that I got as a benefit for me to continue paying the membership fee? So other than from the awareness angle and the suasion that has been alluded to, we also trying to see to what extent we can engage with the government, such that if there are possible appointments happening into the board, and members have been telling us around this, is that we want to indicate that us who then can be a source of appointments. And I think on that one, we are slowly moving, but as Director Chisanga has mentioned, it's a long journey. But the more we interact with the government, the more we interact with private sector on the placements of people on the board, also the more the members see the benefit, apart from good corporate governance, good corporate citizen, the fact that good corporate governance is an investment into a business, but also to an extent, how these members will reflect on having been a member for 3 years and the subscription fee having paid for 3 years and what benefit that has given them. So it's that combination of factors that go into play. So we continue to bring to the fore those efforts to ensure that we continue to have high subscription to membership. So it's not an easy call, but it's continuous effort around that. That would be my contribution to that. I thank you.
Thank you, my president. I think you came across very well.
Thank you very much, President Kabwe. And from the discussion, I'm looking at from where we are and seeing the challenges that are faced. They seem to be the same across Africa. I mentioned a couple of minutes earlier on that we are at different stages in Africa in terms of corporate governance per respective country. Looking at the dates that we started having IoD, also the activities, the activeness of the respective IoD. And that, be that as it may, we all know that even the weak becomes strong when they are united. And further to that, where there is unity, there is always victory. And as the IoD Chairs Forum right now, they are working on a sample that would be used across Africa, trying to find common ground, common challenges that we are faced as Africa in us leading the organization, in us achieving a best practice in corporate governance. So efforts are being made. Let's take note, efforts are being made at Africa level. IoD Chairs Forum is dealing with that. You've been told about tomorrow's chairs who are here. Make sure that you join us tomorrow so that we drive this agenda. For us to have Africa, we are talking of a continental free trade area, Africa continental free trade area, where there will be free movement services and services and goods. Trade will be happening more. We have Vision 2063 for Africa. All those will be supported by best practice in corporate governance. And if we do not play our part, play our role, then it will count for nothing. And the responsibilities falls on the individuals. We have seen how Mr. Patrick Sanga took man out of his own pocket to fund the IoD, to fund the motions of his own office space, his post office box. So such service is what is required to transform and change the corporate governance forum in Africa. We all need to play our part, and we all have a responsibility. And at this point in time, I wish to express my greatest appreciation to President Roxon Dobega for pushing through this agenda, for being active, and also for Institute of Ghana, who are hosting us today, for all that they have done, all that they are doing, and all that they will do. We appreciate that. This will definitely change the corporate governance spectrum in Africa. I would like to thank the guests of our guests for sharing with us and also reminding us of what has to be done and sharing with us what we have to do. We talked about raising the bar and the aspect of the code, a universal code of corporate governance in Africa comes in for discussion. The continuous improvement governance issues, building on that we had keen 1, 2, 3, 4. The next thing is 5. So this is a journey, an ongoing journey, with destination being 2063 for us to have the Africa we want. Then the acceleration of the code for Africa. This, as I mentioned, is being done by a Pan-African level, being pushed by the ACGN and also together with the IoD Chairs Forum. So much is happening, and the responsibility is ours. I leave the challenge to you, ladies and gentlemen, and it has been a wonderful evening, a long evening for that matter. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for the time. All the past presidents, we've made their time to share and exchange notes. There will be more functions like this, which will be happening across Africa. There will be more activities, more discussions, as we refine and fine-tune corporate governance forum in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much and have a pleasant evening.
very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Have a very wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Let's see if we can.